This is Library Nerds with Words, the podcast that gives you the word on all the cool, nerdy happenings at Peter White Public Library and the library universe beyond. From books and concerts to search engines and story times, the library nerds are in and ready to show you that being a nerd can be cool. Get ready, get set, get nerdy. Welcome back to Library Nerds with Words, the podcast that gives you the word on all the cool things going on at Peter White Public Library and the library universe beyond, straight out of the mouths of the people who know it best, library nerds. My name is Marty Ackett, and I'm the Adult Programming Coordinator for Peter White Public Library. Joining me in the original Nerd Penthouse again today is one of everyone's favorite Library Nerd All-Stars, Lynette Suckow, the Assistant Head of Adult Services. Welcome back to the podcast, Lynette.
I'm always happy to be back on the podcast.
Absolutely. And I'm always happy to be able to sit down and talk all things library with you. You might say you bring a different perspective to the podcast. Yes, that is a hint as to what Lynette will be talking about in a little while. Adult Services is such an important department in the library, handling patron questions and research, helping people find materials they're looking for, and walking people through the steps of getting their passports. You might say that Adult Services is the original one-stop shop. Yes, that is another clue as to what is on Lynette's mind today. But before we find out your point of view on today's topic, yes, that is another clue, and they're all terrible. We have to play another game of Word on the Nerd, Lynette. And you know how this works. I'm going to ask you 3 library nerd questions, and you have to answer them for listeners. So, Lynette, are you ready to play
Word on the Nerd?
Lynette, this is going to be another game of Would You Rather. I'm going to ask you 3 Would You Rather questions, and you have to truthfully answer them for the listeners. And all of the questions today have something to do with familiar books and their characters in some way. So let's get started. Here's your first question. Would you rather watch the original movie of The Wizard of Oz starring Judy Garland, or would you rather watch the new screen adaptation of the musical Wicked starring Ariana Grande?
Well, that is a fantastic question because I never saw the Wicked, the play itself. Mm-hmm. But I am waiting for the movie version to come. Mm-hmm. And I probably wait a little bit longer because we don't go to the movies very much.
Right.
So,
okay.
But anyway, I could. But, so I'm waiting expectantly for that. But on the other hand, I really love the original Wizard of Oz. That has been my all-time favorite movie since I was a child.
Wow.
So even though other favorite movies come up, that one always stands out. So when I was a kid, they only had black and white TVs. Mm-hmm. And then my friend got a color TV. Oh. So we'd go to her house to watch The Wizard of Oz. So you could watch it when it
turns to color.
It turns into color and the whole world opens up in, the world of color. And I know all the songs and everything. I just adore that movie. I did try to read the book once too, but it wasn't quite the same.
It's not the same, no.
No, it isn't the same. It's a lot more laid back. The movie is where it's at on this, The Wizard of Oz. So I'm really expecting Wicked to be as good. And there is a Wicked version by Maguire.
Maguire, yeah.
Yeah, and Greg Maguire writes Wicked, The Life and Times of the Wicked Witch of the West. Mm-hmm. And he does some other Oz perspectives, too. Like there's the original written by Frank L. Baum, and then this perspective of the Wicked Witch of the West. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so he has other perspectives in there, too. I think from the Scarecrow and the Lion.
Yeah, he's got like a whole series.
Yeah.
I think Wicked was the first, and then he went on from there.
Yeah.
So.
And then he also has a series of fairy tale reimaginings. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, he's really a perspective kind of guy.
He really is. Yeah. Yeah, I do remember with The Wizard of Oz, That was a big thing in my family. We had 9 kids, including me and my family. So when that was on TV, my mom would make like this big thing of buttered popcorn, and everybody like would be there.
It was a once a year occasion.
Yes,
that's all. And so then when I grew up, and VHS tapes would be, like movies would come available. You could watch them in your home
anytime you want.
That was, I remember, a friend got that for me. That was the best present ever, to have The Wizard of Oz of my own.
So you can watch it anytime you want.
I just thought that was great.
I do remember there was something really special, like Sound of Music only came on once a year.
Yes.
And
The
Wizard
Peter
of
Pan.
Oz,
Did you get to watch Peter Pan?
Once a year.
Yep.
And even Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory was like that, where they would only show it once a year on TV. And there's something, I love streaming, and I love being able to watch my movies anytime I want.
Yes.
However, there was something really special about everybody sort of gathering around and
it
watching
was a big deal. It's almost like Christmas when you get together to watch those Christmas specials.
Exactly, yeah. And now you can just watch them wherever you want.
And I think The Wizard of Oz came out in the spring.
Yep.
I remember that.
Yeah, I do remember. So, yeah, it was a big deal. Kids these days just don't know how good they have it.
Oh, yeah.
All right. Well, the questions might get a little more difficult from here on out. All right, so here's your second question. Would you rather be a character in the novel David Copperfield by Charles Dickens, or would you rather be a character in the novel Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver?
Well, although I love the original Dickens things, that world of England where people are poor, and they end up in these debtors' prisons, and just the class system was so pervasive. I mean, we still have it a little bit now.
Yes, yeah.
I grew up with, there were welfare families in town and
absolutely.
stuff. And also, so no, not the original Old English one by Dickens.
All right.
But Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver was almost, and it is today, it's very modern. It was a throwback to when I was a kid and grew up in a poorer area of the UP and saw that stuff going around. However, there were not the drugs like there are today. When I left the area after college, I left for college and then I left the area. My little brother was starting to get in trouble with drugs and get in trouble with the law and stuff. Yeah. And I just wasn't that person. Like I was Miss Goody Two Shoes, which thank goodness. But I just didn't have that. But then that area just became saturated with more than just marijuana. It was the meth stuff that really, and now it's the veterinarian drug, the fentanyl.
The fentanyl,
which you also get if you go to a colonoscopy.
Yeah, absolutely.
You probably should erase that.
No, but you do that. Yeah, I mean,
controlled amount.
there's something to be said for both. I mean, I love Victorian England and reading about that. But the poverty that people experienced back then, where people literally, you owed a couple pounds, you were thrown into debtor's prison.
I feel like it was more out of control because I know I have to have more empathy for people that have addiction because, like, to me, it's just like, well, why can't you just stop doing that? You know, I know it's a lot more serious than that, but these days it seems like it's more under our control. Where in the old days, the law was after you.
Absolutely,
yeah.
And I mean, they throw you in prison until you could pay it, and it's like, so how are you supposed to pay it if you can't go out and work?
Yeah,
I mean, the debtor's prison was a terrible thing. But Demon Copperhead, I mean, I love that book. But I tell you, her depiction of how drugs sort of destroyed the Appalachian area like that is
well, they destroyed most rural places, like in Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota. Yeah. A lot in Illinois. I know a lot of those places also were destroyed by drugs.
I think that there's more of a chance if you're in the Demon Copperhead universe that you might be able to get out.
In that universe, easier. Well, yeah. I mean, there's pulling yourself up by the bootstraps, but man, once you're on that stuff, maybe not. Maybe you
not.
can't pull yourself back up. So,
all right. Well,
that was depressing, Marty.
I'm sorry. Okay, maybe this next one will be a little easier. Okay, all right. So this is your last question, Lynette. Would you rather read a retelling of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein from the perspective of Victor Frankenstein's pet gerbil, or would you rather read a retelling of Daniel Defoe's Robinson Crusoe from the perspective of Robinson Crusoe's pet parrot?
Okay, so this was so funny.
Okay.
I mean, I'm just going, you could have picked other Frankenstein, perspectives.
Yes.
But from the pet gerbil was pretty funny. So that's the one I would pick. Because, so we have the original Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, of course. Mm-hmm. And then we also have one from the perspective of his sister, but it was out. Okay. And I think it's a teen book, The Despairing Life of whatever her name is, Frankenstein. Okay. And so it was that perspective, looking in on the whole Frankenstein situation. So another one is called Frankenstein in Baghdad. And this person, Ahmed Sadawi, is looking at a human rights violation of people being killed, and he wants to make a statement. So he starts sewing up this person from different body parts. Oh, wow. And just to make the statement like, you know what? Each one of these people means something. Life is not expendable. Like, you can't just do this. This is definitely a violation of human rights. Yeah. So anyway, that's a different perspective for sure. A different perspective. A political and different perspective.
Yes, a different social, political perspective. So are you saying the gerbil from Victor?
So I think I like the Frankenstein whole story better than the Robinson Crusoe story. Okay. Yeah, so that's the one I want to watch because it just draws in so many different, moral things. Robinson Crusoe was a survival story, and there's a lot of moral stuff there too, like, should I kill this or that? But this taking different people and making them into your own monster that you can control, which he could not control, is a little bit different. Yeah. And then, so when you said pet gerbil and pet parrot, over Thanksgiving Day, this is a great story. I watched not the Macy's Day Parade in New York because the TV was on the Fritz, like that channel. And so we got Channel 3 from Green Bay, and they went to Detroit and did the Detroit Parade, which was marvelous. But I think his name is Devin Cillian. His last name is Cillian. And he is one of the newscasters there, but he's also a children's book author, and I've met him. And he's the nicest person when you're meeting him. And he wrote Memoirs of a Goldfish. So it's the goldfish's perspective on being a pet. That's cool. He also wrote one about being a parrot, and then on being a gerbil or hamster maybe. And so that just went flashing in my brain. And so it made it. So you're all for the gerbil perspective. Yeah.
All right. I would go with the gerbil too, because parrot's a little expected, for Robinson Crusoe. You would expect something like that, but a gerbil for Victor Frankenstein. I would vote for that one too. All right. Well, there you go.
Yeah, that one was a lot better.
there you go. We didn't end with something depressing. So, all right. Well, there you have it. We have come to the end of this perspective edition of Word on the Nerd with Assistant Head of Adult Services, Lynette Suckow. And now the time has come to count the votes and find out what is on your mind today, Lynette. Well, actually, that's not another clue because I should have changed that.
That was from our election.
Yes, I was reading. I always choose the old script and then go back and change stuff. That'll work. Anyway, so why don't you share with us the word? All right, Lynette, what are we talking about today?
So, as I've already reviewed two books.
Yeah, exactly. But if you haven't figured it out yet, here we go.
Storytelling from a different perspective. So, whatever classic you might have around the house or you might like to take out of the library, there are other offshoots of that extensions of the story or retellings of the story or reimaginings of the story, whatever you want to call it. And so I found a lot of them, and they were easy to find online too. And so I brought a few that you might be interested in. This is kind of recent. George Orwell's book, 1984, Science. Well, it's under fiction, but it's kind of sci-fi. It's dystopian. It really is, yeah. Yeah. And then last year, 1984, Julia came out. Oh, yeah. Julia, a novel. Yep. And this is from the perspective of Winston, who was the other main character, Winston's girlfriend, Julia. Who is really not mentioned that much, because it's not her perspective. This is her story, a perspective of the whole situation that they lived in this 1984 novel of Big Brother looking.
Big Brother's watching.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was the subject of many book clubs over the year.
That was a really popular book.
Yes, it was very popular. And, okay, that's a little bit later. I'm going to go to this one. So we have a lot of Shakespeare that's been reimagined. We were just mentioning Hamlet. And then Hamnet is the thing. And then, what did I just put up there? Nutshell is another one that is another reimagining of the characters from different characters in the play Hamlet. And so this is The Tempest, also by Shakespeare.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And my fave, Margaret Atwood, wrote this a few years ago. This is called Hag's Seed. And it is a reimagining of The Tempest. It's like a college professor who is the main character, but the Tempest theme is followed throughout. So I really enjoyed this a lot. I thought it was going to be longer and dry when I first saw, I don't know. And then it got really good. Okay. So, yeah. That's
Hag's Seed by Margaret Atwood.
Seed. It's a Hag-Seed. And she really lives up to her name in that one because you just never know what she's going to come up with. No. Yeah. And then, of course, the Frankenstein. This is Mansfield Park. So not only does Jane Austen have Mansfield Park, which just happens to have this motherless land, which is not even in the United States. It's in Africa, and then she goes to England from there. So it's like the heroine in Mansfield Park ends up not living where she was born, living in Mansfield Park and adjusting to the new world of culture and society that way. But also there's more Jane Austen. Pride and Prejudice has so many. Oh my gosh.
Pride and Prejudice and Zombies. That's the one that comes to mind.
I love that one. At first I thought, I'm not going to like this because they're making fun of it. Stupid. Yeah, but it was. So the best part is when is it Elizabeth? Oh my God, I'm forgetting my characters.
It is Elizabeth.
Elizabeth is the main character. When her friend Jane, perhaps? I can't remember her name either. So when her best friend, ends up marrying that pastor who Elizabeth just went, no, I am not marrying you. So when Jane sees that opportunity and marries him, well, in the zombie book, it tells something about her being able to control him because all she has to do is bite him and he becomes a zombie too. So it was just really, I just laughed my head off because I thought she has the upper hand in this situation, which she did anyway because she was intelligent and that guy was not. Yeah. So, oh my gosh.
I love that version. Oh, it was so much fun.
It was good. And then there's Longbourn, which is, I think, an under the stairs, like upstairs, downstairs version of Pride and Prejudice. The other Bennet sister comes at you from Mary, the very quiet sister, from her point of view. And then there's Aisha at Last, which is another version, different culture. Pride and Prejudice from a different culture. Oh, wow. Okay. So it's a Muslim family. All right. So that one is also really interesting. Oh, I have so many. Oh my gosh. And then there's the classics like Jane Eyre. So come from The Wife Upstairs, the perspective of
from
the wife. The wife from the
one that's
Caribbean,
and
she's in the attic. And then the Wide Sargasso Sea, like the place that she actually came from. So that's really cool. One I didn't have on here was Huckleberry Finn.
Oh, yeah.
By Mark Twain. And then this year, the
big book this year, James.
The Nobel. No,
it won
National
Book Award.
National Book Award was James by Percival Everett. I really like that book a lot because the slave's perspective on this, and Huckleberry was kind of a doofus, and James had it together, and he acted really silly around white people because he was expected to.
He's protecting himself.
Yeah, but he really had it together.
Yeah,
so
that book
I
is
really
huge
love
this year.
I love that book. Yeah, that was a great one. And what else? Oh, there's another really good one, Moby Dick, and then the perspective of Moby Dick's wife. It was Ahab's wife, and that one was really good because he was kind of cracking up after all those, all that time at sea, and she was coming from a past that wasn't quite respectable according to the times, because I think she had been widowed or something, and she just took off and met up with him, and they made a great match because she was very accepting of him, and he, being unusual also, was very accepting of her, which I'm sure was quite respectable. But the rules in those days, way different.
And it also humanizes Ahab a little bit because he comes across as kind of a monster in Moby Dick. Yeah, and Ahab's wife, he's a little softer, I think.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, so that is really good. The Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne.
I love that book. Yeah.
So in the book Hester, it's kind of the same. Well, it isn't the same, but she's abandoned by her husband, who brings her to the States from England and then leaves and goes back on a project. And then she's left there for years. And so she has an affair and has a child, and of course is stamped the adulterer. And so that one was a little bit different perspective than the Scarlet Letter, which isn't her. It is her story in a way, but it's more isn't it the preacher's?
It's the Reverend Dimsdale that you get most of it from.
Yeah. So anyway, this is all Hester's perspective, and so
that sounds fantastic.
It's really more of an. It's the same time period and everything. It's just more of an in-depth, like, okay, this person's telling the story. No, this person's telling the story. It's not an adaptation in any way. So that one was really, really good too. Little Women, of course, there's March, which is the dad's story.
I love that book.
Yeah, Geraldine Brooks writes that. And then Ann Napolitano wrote one called Hello, Beautiful. It's Little Women with a basketball theme. So you just never know what you're looking for there.
It might be good.
Here's something I can recommend too.
Okay.
This is so from the Bible. There is Mary called Magdalene by Margaret George. Everyone loves her books. And she wrote a whole bunch of reimaginings about famous women.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so, and also The Red Tent.
Oh, I love that book.
I love that book. It's from Genesis, chapter 34, and it's by Anita Diamant. And she was not really a big writer or anything, but reimagining that life with Jacob and Rachel and, all that crowd. Really, I was just like glued to it.
Yeah, I love that book a lot.
Yeah, and King Arthur, that's a legend, so that's in the 398s with the fairy tales and all that. But The Mists of Avalon by Marion Zimmer Bradley, where it takes Morgaine's perspective on the whole thing instead of King Arthur's perspective. So wonderful and imaginative. And trying to look. Oh, 1,000 Acres by Jane Smiley takes on King Lear. Lear. The King Lear, but with she and her sisters when their dad dies. So
and when I first read that book, I didn't even realize that we were talking. It was a Lear retelling when I started reading it.
It's just a good book.
It's just a good book. And then when I was getting into it, I was like, wait a minute. This is like a total reimagining of King Lear.
Yeah,
So-
yeah, that was a really good one. And then there's a lot of kind of new reimaginings of the Greek gods and goddesses. So if you are a fan of the Iliad and the Odyssey, the
With
all the way
Odysseus
over
and the Trojan War and all that.
Yep. There is the Penelopiad by Margaret Atwood because it's Penelope's. She was left home for many years also, and more than 5. I tell you, I think
was
it was
over
more like
20
15.
years.
Or was
it was
over
20 years that he was gone?
Yep.
Yeah.
And then Medea and Circe, one of the witches that Odysseus met on the way back. And also, there's Medusa. Medusa's sisters, but Medusa was also somebody that he met on the way back. And so, or maybe on the way there in order to be successful in war.
I think it was on the way there.
Yeah. And so Medusa's sisters brings humanity to those snake-headed women.
I always felt sorry for them.
Yeah.
Because they get stuck. The gods take advantage of them and then they punish them.
And then they punish them. And that is, I think in Divine Might, you might see that that side of Hera punishing Medusa and turning her into this creature that, and I think Medusa also gets raped by one of the major gods
by
beside
Neptune.
Neptune.
Yeah.
And then it's like, well, I'm helping you so that nobody can do that, can violate you again because you're going to turn them into stone.
Yeah.
So it was like, oh yeah, thanks.
It's almost like victim blaming in a lot of ways in Greek myths.
And Hera in Greek myths was just like a piece of work. So.
She really is.
My
she
gosh.
can't get at her husband because he's the king of the gods. So instead, she just punishes every woman that he takes advantage of.
She's just mean. And Ariadne is in this one by Jennifer Saint. And then Clytemnestra.
Wow.
Also, so all these women characters are reimagined from their perspective because really the Odyssey is a man's story. It's full of adventure and it really takes advantage of women in a lot of ways. And so, there's
so interesting that most of
there.
those reimaginings of Greek myths are from the female perspective.
Yeah,
practically every single one of them.
They don't have a voice in it. They are victims a lot of times in there. So it is really interesting and endearing that finally came to pass.
Okay.
So that about wraps it up on those. I have them on the display table or the entrance display now.
And she's Lynette set it up, I think, yesterday or the day before.
On Monday.
And and the books already started going off the shelf. So check that out. It's a really wonderful display. Lynette always comes up with really interesting, creative displays.
They're always kind of academic, I find.
But I love them. And, pairing these original texts with reimaginings, I think that's brilliant. So
it's fun.
All right. Well, there you go. That is Assistant Head of Adult Services Lynette Succow's word for today on books that approach famous works of literature from different points of view and perspectives. However, we can't let you leave the NCI, that is the Nerd Center of Investigation, just yet, Lynette. First, we have to get a book recommendation from you, something that you think listeners should immediately run to the library and pick up off the shelf. All right, Lynette, what have you been reading that is good?
Well, I always read ahead, and so I am reading about men who write books about men, male authors. And so I have an old one and a new one.
All right.
The old one is The Ski Jumpers by Peter Geye, Geye. And that was the topic of this morning's book group, the Heritage Room book group.
Okay.
It is about a man who has ski jumping in his blood. He's done it for years and years, but now he's a university professor, and he is entering dementia. And so he wants to get his thoughts down and kind of resolve his childhood whatever went on there that people think about for years. And so this is his story.
Okay.
And so it is also a winter story. It's about ski jumping in Minnesota.
How close to the UP.
Yes, and
so...
it mentions the UP. It mentions Suicide Bowl in Ishpeming, and it mentions Northern Michigan University.
Okay.
So that's kind of cool. But also, there's a lot of relationship stuff in that story. So, yep, I would recommend that. And then Tooth and Claw.
Tooth and Claw. Okay.
Tooth and Claw of a Polar Bear.
Okay.
Because this is called Tooth and Claw by Craig Johnson, who writes the Longmire series.
Oh, okay.
And so Longmire and Standing Bear, his best friend, have just finished their Vietnam War stint, and they are visiting an oil rig in the Arctic region, in the Arctic Circle. And so there's a big storm, and there's polar bear dangers, because there's some polar bear that's not acting like conservation officers would think. It's kind of a rogue. And so they're investigating that, and they find this old ship from 1931. I can't pronounce the name of it, the SS something, because it was owned by Hudson's Bay Company in Canada. And it was used to get furs and then trade, other items. Yeah. So anyway, it's got a little bit of history in there too, and so it's kind of unique in that way. And so I am enjoying it a lot. I'm not quite done with it, but I do love those characters, and I do love that series. It always has a good ending. Always. And since this is from 1970, we know that Walt Longmire character is still alive.
Still alive, so it's going to be good. You don't have to worry that your favorite character is going to die.
Nope, not at all.
All right. So that is The Ski Jumpers by Peter Geye and Tooth and Claw by Craig Johnson.
Yep.
All right. Well, there it is, fellow library nerds. Lynette's recommendations of things that you should pick up off the shelf. And believe it or not, we have come to the end of this Point of View episode of Library Nerds with Words. I want to thank Lynette Suckow, Assistant Head of Adult Services here at Peter White Public Library, for stopping by Nerd Mart today. Come back next week when I will be sitting down with Stephanie Garn, Head of Tech Services, for a little taste testing episode of the podcast. Until that time, everyone, stay nerdy. Thank you for listening to Library Nerds with Words, Peter White Public Library's weekly podcast, giving you the word on what's cool at the library. The theme for the podcast is Happy Clappy by John Bartman, used courtesy of Pixabay. This episode was written and produced by Martin Acketts and sponsored by Peter White Public Library. Until next week, pick up a good book, listen to some good music, watch a good movie, attend a great event, and remember, library nerds are the coolest people around.